And I would love to introduce our next speakers. So we have a keynote speaker, U.S. Representative Ritchie Torres, Congressman for the state of New York. Representative Richie Torres is a fighter from the Bronx who has spent his entire life working for the community he calls home. Like many people in the South Bronx, poverty and struggle have never been abstractions to him, and he governs from a place of lived experience. In 2013, at the age of 25, Richie became New York City's youngest elected official and the first openly LGBTQ person elected to office in the Bronx. At the city council, Richie stood out, and during his 7-year tenure, he tenaciously tackled problems big and small for the Bronx and New York City. He passed over 40 pieces of legislation, including legislation protecting the city's affordable housing stock and tackling the city's opioid epidemic. Richie currently lives in the South Bronx and represents New York 15 in the South Bronx. He is a member of the Committee of Financial Services and serves as the Vice Chair of the Committee of Homeland Security. And he will be in conversation with Zara, who is Power to Fly's global DEI strategist and trainer. I'll pass the mic to you two now. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Mariella. I know I'm personally really excited to be speaking with someone who's representing New York City. I am based in Brooklyn myself, so it's very exciting to sort of be able to have these conversations. So as Mariella mentioned, I am with Power to Fly. I am on the DEI team, and so I am very excited, to really be here with Representative Torres to talk a little bit more about the great work that he is doing and to just learn a little bit more. So I would love to kick it over to Representative Torres to start us off. And we'd be really honored if you can really just start off by telling us a little bit more about your inspiring journey. I know we're all really excited to hear a bit more. Representative Torres, if you're there, you're still muted.
Hello.
Hello, so lovely to have you. We would love to start by hearing a little bit more about your inspiring journey.
Sure. I guess I'll share my story. I admittedly do not fit into the typical profile of a member of Congress. The average net worth of members of Congress is $1 million a year. I do not have deep pockets. I do not have deep political ties. I'm not part of a dynasty, but what I feel like I uniquely bring to the table is the wisdom of lived experience. I know what it's like to face poverty and inequality. I know what it's like to struggle with food insecurity and housing insecurity. I know what it's like to have family members who have been caught up in the criminal justice system. I had 2 half-brothers who were in prison for most of their adult lives. So the challenges facing places like the South Bronx, and elsewhere in America, these challenges are not abstractions to me. They strike close to home. And so I govern from a place of lived experience. The most important thing to know about me is I'm a fighter. Nothing has been handed to me on a silver platter. I've had to fight for everything I have in my life. I spent most of my life in poverty in the Bronx. I was raised by a single mother who had to raise 3 of us on minimum wage, which in the 1990s was a mere $4.25 an hour. So imagine being a single mother raising 3 children on $4.25 an hour in the most expensive city in America. It's almost mission impossible. And the most formative experience of my life was growing up in public housing, living in conditions of mold and mildew, leaks and lead, without consistent heat and hot water in the winter. And I actually grew up in a public housing development right across the street from Trump Golf Course. So my life is something of a metaphor. In fact, when the golf course was undergoing construction, it unleashed a skunk infestation. So I jokingly tell people that I've been smelling the stench of Donald Trump well before he became president. But as I saw the conditions in my home get worse every day, the government had invested more than $100 million in a golf course for Donald Trump. And I remember asking myself at the time, what does it say about our society that we're willing to put more money into a golf course than in the homes of low-income Black and brown Americans? And so that experience of housing inequality is what inspired me to get my start as a housing organizer. And then eventually at age 24, I took the leap of faith and ran for public office. I had no deep pockets. I had no ties to the dynasties or party machine of Bronx politics. I was openly gay in a borough that had a long tradition of social conservatism. But being young and energetic, I spent a whole year doing nothing but knocking on doors. I went into people's homes and heard their stories. And I won my first campaign on the strength of door-to-door, face-to-face campaigning. I became the first openly LGBTQ elected official from the Bronx. What's remarkable is that 7 years before that, I was at the lowest point in my life. I had dropped out of college because I was struggling with depression. I was abusing substances. I even lost my best friend to a fatal opioid overdose. And there were moments when I thought of taking my own life because I felt as if the world around me had collapsed. And so to think 7 years later, I became the youngest elected official in America's largest city. And today I'm a United States congressman. You know, the lesson learned from my life is even in your moment of greatest hardship, never lose hope. You know, my story is the story of the Bronx. It's a story of struggle, but it's also one of overcoming.
We are so, I'm personally so inspired just to hear your story. You know, I think as you mentioned, like that lived experience piece is so important. And I know you mentioned like public housing and sort of your experiences growing up in that and what you sort of witnessed growing up. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your mission of ensuring that public housing gets its fair share of the Build Back Better Act. Would love to hear a little bit more about that from you.
So I advocate for affordable housing, A, because it is important to me, it's personal. And B, because it is objectively important to the future of New York City and the future of the United States. It's important to me because I would not be where I am today were it not for public housing and the stability it gave me and my family. My life has been a journey from public housing in the Bronx to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. And so given the power of affordable housing in my own life, I feel a profound obligation to pay it forward, to ensure that people have access to the same safety net that enabled me to overcome. Yeah. But it's also objectively important to the future of our country. And I'll speak specifically about public housing. So the New York City Housing Authority, which manages public housing in New York City, it's known as NYCHA, is the largest provider of affordable housing in the United States. So if NYCHA were a city unto itself, it would be the largest city of low-income Black and Brown Americans in the country. And NYCHA has been so chronically underfunded by the federal government that it has a capital need of $40 billion in counting. So there are children who have been poisoned by lead in their own homes because of federal defunding. There are senior citizens who during the cold of winter are freezing in their homes with their boilers breaking down because of federal defunding. There are disabled residents who are stranded in top floor apartments with their elevators breaking down because of federal defunding. There are asthmatics who are struggling to breathe in the face of molded and leaking conditions because of federal defunding. So I know from personal experience that the conditions in public housing represent a humanitarian crisis. And the central mission of my life has been to advocate for poor people of color in public housing, to ensure that we are investing enough to finally address the humanitarian crisis that has taken hold.
I love that. And again, I love that you have such personal lived experience that it's really, you know, it is personal to you. And I think that it's amazing that you're able to really bring that into what you focus on. I'd love to hear, so you talked a little bit about the act and sort of like this real humanitarian crisis that's happening. What were some of the challenges you had to overcome to pass this legislation?
Which legislation?
When we were talking about the Build Back Better Act.
We have not passed it yet.
Okay, that's great to know.
So we're in the process of negotiating not one, but two of the largest infrastructure investments in American history. So there's the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which refers purely to physical infrastructure, roads and bridges. And then there's the much larger and much more consequential Build Back Better Act, which refers to not only physical, but social and human infrastructure. And for me, the Build Back Better Act has three themes. The first theme is social contract. It's to create a 21st century social contract that catches all of us when we fall. We're the only country in the industrialized world that does not have a comprehensive social safety net.
Yeah.
I think the second priority is climate change. We have to invest in infrastructure aimed at combating catastrophic climate change. We need infrastructure that reduces greenhouse gas emissions and that's resilient in the face of catastrophic climate change. In New York City, we saw not one, but two record rainfalls in the span of 1 week. And one of those rainfalls was described as a 1 in a 500-year event. So climate change is not a distant threat. It is a reality that we are experiencing painfully in real time. The third theme is pandemic preparedness. We have to ensure that we are not as unprepared for the next pandemic as we were for COVID-19. COVID-19 has left us with a death count of more than 700,000 Americans and a cost of $16 trillion. And so we cannot afford to relive a history whose repeat would do us grave harm.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, this pandemic has definitely illuminated several areas that need to be more focused on. And someone actually shared that New York Magazine just had an illuminating article talking about how many NYCHA buildings don't even have security cameras, even now, even in 2021. So I think this is definitely something that's a real issue. And I'm really glad you're able to focus on it and highlight it.
It's even worse than that. I mean,
yeah.
Beyond security cameras.
Absolutely. That's just like one thing that someone mentioned, but I mean, personally, it's way worse than that.
Well, before you get to security cameras, you need roofs and bricks and functioning elevators and boilers.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. We do have a question that came in via the chat about how can New Yorkers participate and support your efforts in the most impactful way?
Reach out to your elected officials. We as elected officials are in the room. We're in the room where it happens. And it matters when masses of constituents are standing up and speaking out and making their opinions be known to their elected officials. Elected officials are much more responsive to grassroots sentiment than you would think.
Yeah.
And if you care deeply about causes like affordable housing, I would urge you, reach out to your member of Congress, reach out to your US senators, and drive home whatever cause is near and dear to your heart.
That's great.
Because if we do not care enough about our neighborhoods to fight and speak out, then no one else will. Yeah. We have to, civic and political engagement, it starts with voting, but it does not end with voting. Right. We have to be engaged in every sense. And now more than ever, because we're facing threats to democracy, both here at home and abroad. Right. And so none of us as citizens can afford to be complacent.
Yeah, I mean, we started off by talking about how you're a fighter, and I love that we're ending with that as well, because I think that that's really the mentality, and that it's very clear that that is your mindset, and that's why you're tenacious. You know what needs to be fixed. You're going after it, and I'm very excited that we were able to spend a little bit of time today chatting a little bit more, getting to know you a little bit more. I just want to really thank you for being here, and I'm going to kick it back over to Mariela.
Awesome. Thank you both. Enjoy the rest of your day. All right, let's keep this flowing.